Salam and peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase, and together we continue our journey into the language of reality. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field called phi, spelled Phi. Phi is the holophase, a cyclic rhythm defined at every point in the universe. Its first echoes give us three voices at once: time, which we call omega, spelled Omega, space, which we call k, and motion, which we call v, built from both omega and k. Above them, higher derivatives form a branching tree that in principle goes on forever. Every law of nature is a pattern in this tree of derivatives of phi. Today, we zoom into just one more branch of that tree. In part 21, we took the knots and windings from part 18 and showed how they can behave like particles and charges. In part 22, we saw how the shape of phi, its slopes and curvatures, becomes what we usually call forces and geometry. Knots in phi act like matter. Curvature in phi acts like the rule for motion. Now, in part 23, we ask a very humble and very deep question. How much of this infinite language can we actually read? It is like standing in front of an endless library, with shelves stretching beyond the horizon and asking, with the one lifetime I have and with my two small hands, how many books can I really open? How many pages can I really understand? The Master Tree of Holophase is that library. Phi and all its derivatives, from the first simple slopes to the wild higher orders, make an infinite dictionary. But we, as finite creatures with finite tools, can only touch a tiny fragment. This part is about that gap. Not to make you feel small, but to make our project honest, falsifiable, and real. It is easy to speak about infinity. It is harder to ask, what can we actually measure? What can we actually test? Let us start with a very simple, everyday image. Imagine you are standing in a dark field at night. The sky above you is full of stars. In some directions, you see bright clusters. In other directions, you see almost nothing. Now imagine that you suddenly receive a magical message. There are not just the stars you see. There is an infinite sea of stars, galaxies, structures beyond any distance you can imagine. You might believe this message. You might find it beautiful. But then a scientist inside you wakes up and asks, all right, but with my small telescope, with my limited eyes, how far can I actually see? Where does my knowledge end and my faith begin? The holophase language is like that infinite sky. The question of this part is, what is our telescope made of? And how far does it really reach? In physics, our telescope is always the same three-part device: preparation, interaction, and measurement. We prepare a system in some way. We let it evolve or we poke it. Then we measure some observable. That is all we ever do. In holophase language, this means the following. We try, as best as we can, to set up a phase pattern phi with some known properties. Then we let that pattern evolve according to the unknown true grammar of the universe. Then we measure some coarse summary of phi or its derivatives. We never see the full tree. We only ever see shadows of a few of its lower branches. You have already met many of those shadows. When we measure time intervals with clocks, we are sampling something like omega, the time echo of phi. When we measure lengths and shapes, we are sampling something like k, the space echo. When we track motion, we are sampling v, the motion echo. When we look at forces, we are sampling how slopes and curvatures of phi affect those echoes. All these things are already one step removed from the full holophase dictionary. They are like reading only the first line of a poem and trying to guess the whole book. Now I want you to imagine a sheet of paper covered with very fine writing. Some lines are big and clear. Others are printed so small you almost cannot see them. You take a magnifying glass. At first, you can read the big letters easily. Then, as you zoom in, more letters become visible. But there comes a point where the ink strokes are thinner than your eye can resolve. Everything below that size blends into a gray blur. That resolution limit is exactly what happens in real experiments. Every measurement device, every camera, every sensor, every detector has a limited resolution in space and in time. It cannot see infinitely small details. It cannot follow infinitely rapid changes. In holophase language, this means your device can only access derivatives of phi up to a certain order and up to a certain fineness. The very high order branches of the master tree are simply invisible. Think of trying to hear a whisper in a busy market. The whisper is there. A microphone close to the mouth might pick it up clearly, but if you stand far away, the noise of the crowd covers it entirely. It has not vanished from reality. It has vanished from your reach. In the same way, high-order derivatives of phi are like whispers under the roar of noise. In principle, they exist. In practice, we often cannot hear them. So our first limitation is resolution. We cannot see arbitrarily small scales of the phase pattern. The second limitation is noise. Even in the scales we can reach, random fluctuations, thermal noise, quantum noise, imperfections blur our view. They act like static on a radio channel. Imagine tuning an old radio. As you twist the dial, you hear bursts of static, faint melodies, sudden clear stations. Each station is like a particular pattern of phi, a specific relationship between omega, k, and other derivatives. But you never hear them in perfect silence. There is always some hiss beneath. In experiments, this hiss shows up as error bars. Whenever a physicist reports a number, they also report an uncertainty, plus or minus this much. That uncertainty is not decoration. It is a crucial part of falsifiability. It tells you how much of the holophase tree you have genuinely constrained and how much remains open. In holophase language, we can say, every measurement chops the infinite tree into three parts. First, the part we have seen clearly, with small uncertainty. Second, the part we have glimpsed only vaguely. We know it is there, but its details are fuzzy. Third, the part that lies entirely beyond our reach, hidden behind noise, resolution, and the finite time we have to look. Between the first part and the third part lives a very important gray zone. This is the region where we have some hints, but not yet a solid reading. In this limbo, different models of phi can still compete. Two different branches of the master tree may look almost the same when viewed through our noisy, low-resolution lens. Only by improving our experiments or by designing clever new setups can we separate them. You can think of this gray zone as the theater of science. It is where our stories about the world are still flexible, still testable. If everything we saw was crystal clear, there would be nothing to argue about. If everything was pure noise, there would be nothing to learn. It is in the middle, where the signal is faint but real, that science does its most interesting work. I want you to feel this not as a technicality, but as an honest boundary of our reading ability. Return to the library image. Imagine that every book has many pages, and every page has both large and tiny letters. With your natural eyes, you can read only the large letters. With a magnifying glass, you can read some smaller letters. With a microscope, you might read even more. But no matter how strong your tools, you cannot read all infinite combinations of ink at once. And you certainly cannot read all the books in the library in one life. In the same way, we cannot hope to map the entire holophase language of the universe. What we can do is more modest and more meaningful. We can pick one shelf, one region, one experiment. We can say, here, in this situation, the universe is speaking a particular dialect of phi. In this dialect, only the first few derivatives matter. The higher ones are silent or negligible at the scales we care about. Then we can test that claim. For example, in many everyday situations, sound waves in air, light in glass, ripples on a pond, the behavior of the system can be captured very well by keeping only up to second-order derivatives of phi in space and in time. That means local values, first slopes, and curvatures. The wild higher orders contribute so little that, at the level of our measurement noise, they might as well be zero. This is not a philosophical statement. It is an empirical one. We try models with only low derivatives. We compare them with data. If they match within the error bars, we say, for this phenomenon, at this scale, the universe is speaking only a simple sentence in phi. If we later discover small deviations, subtle effects that the simple model misses, we may need to include third-order terms or consider more of the tree. That process of gradually adding branches until the model matches reality is how we climb the master tree in practice. Sometimes we even discover that what we thought was noise is actually the first hint of a new branch of the tree becoming visible. To feel this in your body, think about driving a car. Your position on the road is like the basic value of phi. Your speed is like the first derivative of phi with respect to time, how fast you are changing position. Your acceleration, how quickly your speed changes, is like the second derivative. If you have ever been in a car where the driver keeps pressing and releasing the pedal in a jerky way, you have felt something like the third derivative, the change of acceleration, sometimes called jerk. Now imagine that your friend is watching you from a bridge above the road, with a camera that takes one picture every 5 seconds. From those few snapshots, your friend can estimate your average speed. If they zoom in and use many pictures, they might guess your acceleration too. But unless they have extremely fine timing, they will never really see the jerk. It will be blurred out. Experiments on the universe are like that friend on the bridge. We get snapshots of phi at certain times and places. From those snapshots, we can estimate low-order derivatives, speed, and sometimes acceleration along the phase pattern. Very rarely, with extremely careful data, we can glimpse something like jerk. But the higher and higher derivatives of phi, the really fast wiggles of the cosmic car pedal, are usually invisible to us. This is exactly the idea of the jet that we met in part 17. The full jet at a point, the complete list of all derivatives of phi there, would let us predict how the pattern wants to unfold around that point. But in reality, we only ever estimate a small truncation of the jet. Maybe position and speed, sometimes acceleration. The rest hides in the blur we call noise. It is just like learning a language. At first, you use short sentences. I am here. You are there. Then you learn adjectives, adverbs, conditionals, metaphors. You do not need every nuance to say, I am hungry. But if you want to write a novel, you need much more of the dictionary. In physics, some systems are simple enough that low-order derivatives of phi tell almost the whole story. Others, like turbulence, complex materials, or biological tissue, may require many more levels of the tree. We are still discovering how much of the holophase dictionary each domain uses. Sometimes we even discover that what we thought was noise is actually the first hint of a new branch of the tree becoming visible. A tiny systematic deviation from our model, repeated across many experiments, can signal that the universe is using a slightly richer phrase of phi than we expected. In this way, the boundary between signal and noise is itself part of the story of discovery. Now, there is another important limit: time itself. Every experiment takes time to set up, to run, to repeat. We cannot perform infinitely many experiments. Each measurement consumes resources. So even if the underlying phase pattern tries to whisper many stories into reality, we can only listen to a finite sample. Imagine trying to understand a person's entire life by listening to a few phone calls. You might catch their voice, some patterns of speech, recurring words, but many chapters will remain unknown to you. Still, from those few calls, you can build a model. This person tends to speak softly. This person often pauses before answering. This person mentions certain names often. In the same way, from a finite set of experiments, we build partial models of phi's behavior. The art, and the falsifiable content, lies in how well those models hold up when we test them in new situations. Holophase does not magically remove these limits. It embraces them and tries to use them wisely. By insisting that all observables are ultimately readouts of phi and its derivatives, we gain a unified perspective. But we also gain a stricter standard. A proposed holophase model for a phenomenon must survive tests not just in one experiment, but across many experimental arrangements that probe different branches of the tree. For a listener, you can think of it this way. Suppose someone claims, "I know the secret grammar of your language." You can test this claim by asking them to finish your sentences in many different contexts. Predict how you will speak when you're happy, sad, rushed, or relaxed. Guess what you will say to a child compared to what you will say to a judge. If their secret grammar works in all these cases, you give it credit. If it fails often, you discard it. In physics, an equation that claims to capture part of the holophase grammar must succeed in an analogous way. It must predict the behavior of phi-based patterns not only in one neat lab setup, but also in many variations, with different energies, geometries, and timescales. Only then do we believe that we are truly reading the same language the universe is speaking, not just overfitting noise. Now let us talk about infinity directly, but in very simple terms. When we say the holophase language is infinite, we mean at least three things. First, the number of points in space and time where phi is defined is, in any realistic model, enormous, possibly infinite. Second, at each point, the tower of derivatives, first, second, third, and so on, can in principle go on without end. That is like having not just words and sentences, but sentences about sentences, stories about stories, rising without limit. Third, the possible patterns that phi can form across the universe are uncountably vast. Even if you fix the derivatives up to some order in one region, there are many ways the field can develop elsewhere. We, with our finite lives and finite tools, will never grasp all of this. And that is fine. Science has never required that we know everything. It has only required that what we claim to know is tightly linked to what we can, in principle, check. Holophase adds a twist. It says that even within these limits, we might be able to see the same underlying language in many situations. The universality of the code gives us leverage. If we understand how phi behaves in one system, we can sometimes recognize the same pattern in a very different system. Think of learning to read a certain handwriting style. Once you learn to read your friend's messy script in one letter, you can probably read it in another context, on a postcard, on a sticky note. In the same way, once we have pinned down one phrase of the holophase language in a laser beam, we might recognize echoes of it in water waves, in superfluids, in gravitational waves. This is why the limits of our observation, instead of being depressing, can be exciting. They force us to look for structures that repeat across many contexts, because those repeating structures are the ones we can test again and again. You can picture this like listening to music from another room. You cannot hear every instrument clearly, but you can hear the rhythm and the main melody. If you walk to a different room, the echo changes, but the rhythm is still there. By comparing what you hear from many places, you can reconstruct the song far better than from one spot alone. In the same way, by probing phi in many systems, we can reconstruct parts of the universal score. Now, I want to connect this back to you personally. You, as a human being, have your own resolution limit and your own noise. Your senses can only see certain wavelengths of light, hear certain frequencies of sound, feel certain pressures and temperatures. Your attention can only hold a few things at once. Your memory is finite. Yet, even within these limits, you have built a rich model of reality. You have learned to walk, speak, navigate, feel, and think. You do this without ever seeing the full holophase code. You live on a tiny branch of the tree, but you live there fully. In the same way, our scientific instruments and theories live on a tiny branch of the universal tree. They are, in a sense, very local dialects of a cosmic language. Our goal in the Holophase program is not to jump magically to the canopy. It is to make our local dialects more clearly connected, so that we can see them as different expressions of the same root. Before we reach the practical question of modeling, let us walk through one very concrete story. Imagine a simple pendulum clock, a weight on a string swinging back and forth. For centuries, people have used such swings to measure time. In holophase language, you can think of that swinging weight as tracing out a very simple phrase of phi. The angular position is like a low-order feature of the phase. The regular back and forth motion comes from a balance between slopes and curvatures in an effective phase landscape. Now think about how we would study this clock scientifically. First, we might measure only the period, how long one swing takes. That already gives us information about one combination of derivatives of phi. Then we might measure how the period changes when we change the length of the string. That probes a different part of the tree. Later, with more precise instruments, we might notice tiny corrections when the swings are large, or when air resistance matters. Each new level of precision forces us to include one more branch of the holophase grammar in our model of the pendulum. At no stage do we see the whole jet of phi. At every stage, we see just enough of the language to write a slightly better sentence about what is going on. And at each step, the model is falsifiable. It makes predictions for new pendulum lengths, new amplitudes, new environments, which we can test. This leads to a very practical question. How do we decide which part of the tree to keep and which part to ignore in a given model? The answer is always empirical. We start with the simplest branch that could possibly work. For many systems, that means we keep only up to first derivatives or second derivatives of phi. We write down the corresponding equations. We compare with data. If the match is poor, we ask what kind of deviation we see. Does the system respond more strongly to very rapid changes than our model predicts? Then we might need to include higher time derivatives. Does it show sensitivity to very fine spatial structure? Then we might need higher spatial derivatives. Each time we add a new branch, we lose a little simplicity, but gain a little accuracy. The art is to stop when further additions no longer improve the match in a meaningful way. Think of tuning the focus on a camera. You turn the ring until the picture stops getting sharper. Turning further does not help. It may even make things worse. In the same way, adding more and more terms from the holophase tree to a model is only useful up to the point where they are actually constrained by data. From a falsifiability point of view, this is crucial. A model that uses infinitely many branches of the tree with infinitely many adjustable parameters could be bent to fit almost anything. That would make it unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific. A good holophase model must keep only a finite, small set of branches active at a time and must tie their behavior to a small set of parameters that can be fixed by experiment. Once those parameters are fixed, the model must make clear predictions for new situations. Those predictions are the points where the infinite language of phi crosses the finite stage of our laboratories. There, in that crossing, we can say yes or no. Before we close part 23, let us wrap all of this into one simple image you can carry with you. Imagine again the Master Tree of Holophase glowing against a dark background. The root is phi. The first branches are omega, k, the combined change, and motion. Higher up, you see curvature, knots, waves, and more refined structures. The canopy fades into mystery. Now imagine that you are holding a small flashlight. This flashlight is what we can measure. When you shine it at the tree, you only ever illuminate a small patch. Sometimes you light up the lower branches very clearly. Sometimes you catch glimpses of higher twigs. Most of the tree remains in shadow. The work of physics is to move the flashlight around in a disciplined way, to compare notes, to build a map of which parts of the tree we have seen and how those parts hang together. The work of holophase is to suggest that, no matter where you shine the light, you are always looking at the same tree. You, as a listener on this journey, are part of that process. Every time you translate a familiar phenomenon, a falling object, a sound wave, a knot in water, into holophase language, you are practicing seeing the tree with new eyes. Every time you ask, could this really be a pattern in phi? You are sharpening the beam of our shared flashlight. As you listen to all this, you might feel a mixture of awe and discomfort. Awe, because the language behind reality seems so rich. Discomfort, because so much of it lies forever beyond our direct reach. I want you to know that both feelings are healthy. Good science is always a balance between humility and courage. Humility about what we cannot yet read, and courage to keep improving our little flashlight and our tiny local dictionary of phi. Step by step, our reading power grows. For now, let it be enough to know this. The language of phi may be infinite, but our task is finite and clear. We do not need to read every word to know that a language is real. We need only to read enough, carefully enough, that the language begins to answer back in ways we can test. Peace be upon you until the next part.